In exactly 3 seconds, Flight 447 will collide with a cargo plane carrying medical supplies. But somehow, impossibly, everyone will survive the impact that should have killed 537 people instantly. And the reason why will make you question everything you thought you knew about luck, skill, and the thin line between disaster and miracle. Let us know from where you are watching from in the comment below, and subscribe to our channel, because what you're about to discover is how this impossible survival happened when everything went wrong at once. But how did two massive aircraft become invisible to the world and find each other in the worst possible way? Let me take you back 45 minutes earlier when Captain Sarah had no idea her plane was about to disappear from every radar screen in America. Sarah grips the controls as lightning hammers Flight 447, thinking this is just another storm, just another routine flight from New York to Miami with 237 sleeping passengers behind her. But in 30 seconds, everything changes forever. 1. Lightning strike hits like a bomb, killing every radio, every GPS, every communication system, leaving them flying blind while somewhere in the same storm. Cargo pilot David Chen loses contact at exactly the same moment, his plane loaded with medical supplies now racing toward the same deadly coordinates. Sarah tries the radio, nothing but static. James, her co-pilot, frantically flips switches, presses buttons, tries backup systems, but they've gone completely silent, invisible to air traffic control, invisible to other planes, invisible to help. 40 miles away, David Chen faces the same nightmare in his cargo plane. Instruments failing, radio dead. Flying through the same storm with no idea. Another aircraft is nearby, and this is where the deadly game begins. In Miami Control Tower, Lisa Thompson watches 2 radar blips disappear from her screen and feels ice in her veins because she knows what this means. 2 planes are now flying blind toward each other, and she has no way to warn them. Sarah realizes they're lost, really lost. No navigation, no contact with the ground, and she makes a decision that seals their fate. She begins descending to get below the storm, not knowing this path leads directly into David's flight route. The passengers sleep on, trusting their pilot, while Margaret Foster in seat 23A holds her dead husband's photo and somehow senses danger in her bones, the way people do when death is close. James calculates fuel, 40 minutes left, maybe less, and Sarah knows they need to find an airport fast, but which direction is safe when you can't see anything and no one can see you? David Chen fights his own battle with failing instruments, medical supplies sliding around in the cargo hold, and he too starts descending through the storm, bringing 2 aircraft closer together with every passing second. Lisa Thompson in the control tower tries every backup system, calls other airports, even contacts military radar, but the storm has created a dead zone where planes simply vanish from electronic sight. Sarah's hands cramp from gripping the controls, as wind tries to flip them upside down, and she spots something that makes her blood freeze. Lights in the clouds ahead, moving lights that shouldn't be there. Those lights belong to David's cargo plane, and both pilots see each other at exactly the same moment. 2 massive aircraft bearing down on each other at combined speed of 1,000 miles per hour with less than 3 seconds to react. Sarah banks hard left while David pulls up with everything he has, and instead of instant death for 537 people, the planes scrape past each other, tearing metal, shattering windows, but somehow both staying in the air. Flight 447 shudders and rolls, losing altitude fast as alarms scream in the cockpit. Passengers now wide awake and terrified, some praying, others crying, while Sarah fights to regain control of a plane that wants to fall from the sky. The cargo plane spins through the storm like a broken bird, David wrestling with controls that barely respond, medical supplies crashing around in the hold, both aircraft now racing against time to find somewhere to land before they fall apart completely. Lisa Thompson finally gets partial radar contact and begins the most complex emergency landing sequence of her career, guiding 2 damaged planes toward different airports while coordinating with emergency crews who are already racing toward the runways. Sarah sees the most beautiful sight of her life, Jacksonville Airport lights stretching out like stars of hope, but landing a damaged plane with almost no fuel and broken controls means this is far from over. The approach is like controlled chaos, the plane hitting the runway hard, bouncing twice, then skidding sideways as damaged landing gear collapses, metal screaming against concrete, sparks flying everywhere. But somehow they stay on the runway. And when the plane finally stops, the silence feels like a miracle. Emergency crews swarm the aircraft within seconds, helping passengers down emergency slides, while paramedics treat the injured, and Sarah sits in her pilot seat for a long moment, unable to believe they survived something that should have killed everyone. 40 miles away, David Chen attempts his own emergency landing, his cargo plane barely holding together as he approaches a smaller airport, coming in too fast, overshooting the runway, crashing through a fence into an empty field where it skids to a stop just yards from houses full of sleeping families. In the days that follow, investigators call it the most remarkable near disaster in aviation history. But Sarah remembers not the technical details or media attention, but Margaret Foster's voice over the intercom after landing, the elderly woman, asking to thank the pilots for bringing her home to see another sunrise. The storm passed by morning, leaving behind impossibly blue skies. And as Sarah walked through the terminal toward her family, she understood that every landing, no matter how routine it seems, is actually a small victory against forces that would tear us from the sky. But the story doesn't end with just survival, because what happened next would change aviation safety forever. The investigators arrived within hours, led by Dr. Michael Harrison, a veteran crash analyst who had seen every kind of aviation disaster imaginable, but nothing had prepared him for what he found in the wreckage of two planes that should have been completely destroyed. And as he examined the twisted metal and analyzed the flight data, he discovered something that made him question 40 years of aviation science. The collision had occurred at exactly 11:47 p.m., lasting precisely 2.3 seconds, with both aircraft traveling at a combined speed of over 1,000 miles per hour, forces that should have vaporized both planes instantly. But instead of complete destruction, the impact had created what Dr. Harrison would later call the most statistically impossible survival event in aviation history. Sarah spent 3 days in the hospital, not from injuries but from exhaustion and shock, and during those long hours of interviews with investigators, she relived every moment of that night, from the lightning strike that killed their communications to the split-second decision that saved everyone's lives. And she began to understand that their survival wasn't just luck, but a combination of factors so precise that if any single element had been different, 537 people would have died. The passengers, too, were dealing with their own aftermath, and Margaret Foster, the elderly woman who had clutched her husband's photograph, became something of a celebrity when reporters learned that she had somehow sensed the danger minutes before the collision, telling other passengers to hold on tight, even though she had no logical reason to believe anything was wrong. And psychologists would later study her case as an example of human intuition operating beyond normal perception. Tom Bradley, the construction worker who had held his wife's hand so tightly during the crisis, discovered that the experience had changed him completely, and he quit his dangerous job the following week, deciding that life was too precious to waste on unnecessary risks, while his wife Maria left her high-stress corporate position to become a volunteer with disaster relief organizations, both of them understanding that their second chance at life came with responsibilities to help others. The young mother traveling alone with twin babies, Jennifer Walsh, found herself unable to fly for months afterward, but eventually she became a spokesperson for airline safety, working with manufacturers to improve emergency procedures for parents traveling with infants, and her advocacy would lead to new regulations that would save lives in future emergencies. Captain David Chen, the cargo pilot, suffered the most severe injuries during his emergency landing, breaking 3 ribs and suffering a concussion. But his heroic decision to jettison the medical cargo to save his plane and crew was later vindicated. When investigators realized that the extra weight would have made his aircraft impossible to control after the collision, and the earthquake victims in Central America, who eventually received replacement supplies, sent him a letter signed by over 3,000 people thanking him for choosing to save lives over cargo. Lisa Thompson, the air traffic controller who had guided both planes to safety, was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her actions that night, but she would later say that the real heroes were the pilots who managed to land damaged aircraft in impossible conditions, and she continued working in the tower for another 15 years, becoming a mentor to younger controllers and always reminding them that their job was about more than just directing traffic. It was about protecting human lives. The investigation revealed that the storm that night had been caused by an unprecedented combination of atmospheric conditions, creating what meteorologists now call a communication dead zone that can disable aircraft electronics across hundreds of square miles, and new warning systems were developed to alert pilots when they're entering such dangerous areas, systems that have since prevented dozens of similar incidents around the world. Dr. Harrison's final report, published 6 months after the incident, concluded that the collision was avoided by a margin of less than 18 inches, and that the survival of both aircraft was due to what he termed aerodynamic deflection. The way the planes scraped against each other actually helped redirect their flight paths rather than causing catastrophic structural failure, a phenomenon so rare that it had never been documented before in aviation history. Sarah returned to flying 3 months later, but she was never quite the same pilot, and passengers who flew with her often commented on her unusual calmness during turbulence and her habit of making gentle announcements about weather conditions, small reassurances that came from someone who understood how quickly everything could change at 35,000 feet, and she eventually became a flight instructor, teaching new pilots not just the technical aspects of flying, but the importance of staying calm under pressure and never giving up, even when everything seems hopeless. The families of all 537 survivors stayed in touch through a private social media group, sharing updates about their lives and gathering annually on the anniversary of the collision for what they called Second Chance Day, a celebration of life that grew from a small dinner to a major event attended by hundreds of people, including airline safety experts, emergency responders, and anyone who had been touched by the story of Flight 447 and Flight 892. James Rodriguez, Sarah's co-pilot, used his experience to develop new emergency communication protocols that are now standard in aviation training, and his daughter, whose birthday he had almost missed forever, grew up to become an aerospace engineer, inspired by her father's story to work on making flying safer for everyone, and she would eventually design backup communication systems that could function even during the most severe electromagnetic storms. The cargo plane that David Chen had been flying was completely rebuilt and returned to service 6 months later, and it was renamed Phoenix in honor of its resurrection from what should have been certain destruction. And for the next 20 years until it was finally retired, that plane carried medical supplies to disaster zones around the world without a single incident, as if it had been blessed by the miracle of that stormy night. Margaret Foster lived for another 7 years after the collision, and she spent those years writing letters to the families of the other survivors, sharing wisdom about appreciating life's precious moments and never taking tomorrow for granted. And when she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep, her funeral was attended by over 200 people from Flight 447, all of whom considered her the spiritual heart of their survivor family. And her final words, according to her daughter, were, "Tell Sarah I'm flying with my husband now, and the weather up here is perfect." The ripple effects of that night continued for decades, influencing everything from aircraft design to pilot training to emergency response procedures, and aviation safety experts estimate that the lessons learned from Flight 447 and Flight 892 have prevented at least 50 potential disasters in the years since, saving thousands of lives through improved technology and procedures that might never have been developed without the catalyst of that impossible survival story. Sarah eventually retired from flying at age 55, earlier than she had planned. But she spent her retirement years speaking at aviation conferences and safety seminars, always ending her presentations with the same message: that survival in aviation, as in life, depends not just on technology or training, but on the human spirit's refusal to give up hope, even when the storm seems too powerful to survive, and that sometimes the most important communications happen not through radio waves, but through the unspoken understanding between people who refuse to abandon each other, even when everything seems lost. And that's the real reason why 537 people lived through a night when everything that could go wrong did go wrong, except for the one thing that mattered most: the determination to fight for life until the very last second, no matter how impossible the odds might seem.